The former U.S. Chief Information Officer called ACT-IC the Switzerland of the government IT community. And I think what that recognizes, there's value in an objective, neutral forum where government and industry can work together. Today, we're proud to present the first reports from the Institute for Innovation. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Molly O'Neill, who was the co-chair of this project. Molly, it's all yours.
Great. Good morning, everyone. First, let me thank everyone who came in person and those of you who've dialed in online for coming today so we can share the messages in the topic papers. So I'm Molly O'Neill, as Ken said. I was a co-chair of the Quadrennial Government Technology Review, which is quite a mouthful there, steering committee. And my co-chair is Ann Reed, who was not able to be here today. Interestingly, Ann and I met about 4 years ago for the first time. She was on the transition team in, and I was transitioning out. And what we found was we have a lot in common around government technology and passions around what federal technology is occurring. So what that tells to me is that technology really isn't a political thing. That said, about every 4 years is a great time to actually take a pulse and remind a re-elected administration, right, or a new administration about opportunities ahead in the direction that technology can take in the federal government. Today, we have a re-elected administration, but we'll still see senior government leaders change, and we'll see some new directions ahead. So this is a great time to take the pulse and share some direction setting and ideas for the federal government on government technology. As you saw in the video, the Institute for Innovation is live and well now, and it chartered a steering committee to oversee the development of topic papers to hand over to the re-elected administration in this case. To start with, there were steering committees, steering committee members who were identified, and those include some of the folks on the panel today, as well as some folks that are with us here today in person live, who can be here to answer questions and follow up. Early on, the steering committee agreed that we didn't really want to focus on writing pieces about topics about technology itself. It simply didn't resonate with our primary audience, which are federal leaders in government. Instead, we wanted to take a look at some of the biggest governmental challenges out there and then really show how technology can play an important role in solving some of these challenges. And the challenges that we chose, and we looked at a lot of challenges that were out there, were really related to fiscal responsibility, citizen engagement, healthcare, education, because of the impact on jobs, quite frankly. We had a lot of discussion on that, national security, and then we had another one that sort of looked across things, which is really about business and IT alignment. And that was because we talked to a lot of the previous change in administrations, and we understood that there was a need to take a look at that topic as well. So once we chose the topics, we sought volunteers from the community to dive into the challenge, to define the exact area to address. We provided some guidance on the topic, but they really focused on the exact pinpoint of the challenge. And those groups tried to provide the findings of the challenge, what the challenge was about, define it, put some proof points out there, and then offers up some high-level recommendations and more detailed recommendations in some areas on how technology can actually make a difference in that challenge. And as we looked for volunteers for the papers, we used and utilized about 100 volunteers from our government industry community to provide input to these papers. So once the papers were drafted, we actually put together what I'll say is an overall arching, we call it the capstone paper, which highlighted a few of the recommendations in each of the papers and provided some overall themes, because as we looked at these, all of these topic areas, there were definitely some themes out there. And interestingly, as we stepped back and we learned that technology can play a huge role in making advances in the topic areas that we chose to study, such as reducing healthcare costs or improving citizen interactions, right? We also noticed that cutting through all this, a couple things were occurring. One is we can use technology in these challenges, but we're also, by doing so, we're improving the performance of government, we're improving communication across government and with citizens, and using technology can actually serve as a catalyst for change in areas of crisis, such as education. So if I could leave you with a couple things. Everything really comes down to 3 actions, as we saw in the papers. 1, align the business with the technology. 2, improve quality data and leverage it more broadly and in different ways through government. And the third was really invest in technology, especially around the mission. especially new technology that's much more agile and offers so many possibilities to be a catalyst for change. So before I introduce the panel, which where all the substance of today is, let me thank Sarah DiCarlo, who could not be here with us today, but she has been a fantastic resource for us at ACT-IAC. Let me also thank the volunteers out there, including the writers, the researchers, the reviewers, the topic leads, and the communication support, because we all believe that while we're issuing these papers today, there's a lot of communication in terms of what has to happen with these papers. And a special thanks to some of our advisors, Jim Williams, Karen Evans, and Bob Woods. Now, let me introduce the panel today. With me today to describe the 6 topic papers. The panelists are representatives from the steering committee, so these are steering committee members. And just as a point of background, each of the steering committee members sort of championed 2 of the topic papers. Okay, so we have a cross-cutting of those steering committee members here. Wendy Henry, who's to my right here, she'll discuss fiscal responsibility in the STEM and the Science, Technology, Education paper. Steve Lynette, who will discuss citizen-driven government. And Ramon Barpine, who will discuss business IT alignment and the healthcare topic. So each of them will take a few minutes to describe the paper, why they chose to focus on a particular area in that challenge area, key findings, and highlight some recommendations and hopefully some proof points for you today. So let's start with the challenges out there. And one of the biggest challenges out there right now that we could not avoid is around fiscal responsibility. So Wendy, why don't you talk us through that first topic paper?
Okay, so our first topic paper, which Molly called Fiscal Stewardship, which was the early name for the paper, we renamed it to be Unleashing the Power of IT to drive down the budget deficit. And the reason we looked at this challenge, I think everybody understands that the budget deficit is certainly top of mind, but we believed that there was a higher essence to this, and it was reducing the federal deficit, but doing that without jeopardizing the essential mission of government to protect, defend, and serve the citizens of the United States. And in deploying IT and process innovation, we believed that if it's effectively done, it can in fact reduce costs, increase efficiencies, and actually drive up customer satisfaction. Also, when we looked at that, we saw that there were some ancillary benefits that could be realized, and those were increased tax revenues and increased number of jobs available in the system. It's kind of interesting if you look at it from 2008, when the recession started, as a percentage of GDP, the federal debt has actually increased from 35% of GDP to 75%. And it's estimated that in 2020, if in fact sequestration is not implemented and the tax cuts are extended, that in fact we'll pass 100% of GDP. In looking at the IT component of that, what's interesting is in the 2012 budget, there was about $3.5 trillion spent, and of that, $80 billion was in IT, which is less than 3%. When you juxtapose that against the industry best practices, we actually see that IT spending as a percentage of their overall budgets are increasing as they realize that there's increased effectiveness, cost cutting, and actually consumer satisfaction increases that are realized as a result of IT spend. So we looked at some of the proof points, and we looked at the fact that in 2011, let me get to how we did this. We actually looked at 3 agencies that are doing a pretty effective job of employing what we believe the 3 recommendations were. And so we looked at CMS as part of HHS, we looked at the IRS as a part of Treasury, and we looked at the Veterans Affairs. And in looking at those 3 agencies, we started to look at just some of the numbers that were involved. And in 2011, what's really interesting is 25% of the total federal spend was on health care. So if you look at that, and we know that healthcare costs are continuing to increase, it's pretty instrumental. When we look at, and I'll get to the savings that can be done, but looking across that kind of spectrum and what we were looking at, we had 3 recommendations, and I'll bring some of the savings into it as I discuss the recommendations. The first, as Molly said, was to accelerate the use of data analytics to drive down costs. And a great example of this is CMS. So not only have they established an Office of Information Products and Data Analysis, which they're really focusing on the use of data, the interaction of that data, and the analytics that can be applied against that data to manage and enhance their performance, they're also taking an incredible amount of dollars out of the system. And one of the examples is where they use comparative effectiveness research, and they allow not only the patients but the providers to choose a protocol of management that's effective on the first go-round. They're also using staff that is less expensive through the use of decision support systems. Our second recommendation, which was to invest technology to increase productivity and drive down costs, if you think about the fact that really top of mind, people want to be able to engage with services and products when they want them and how they want them. And that's mobile solutions, self-services, and secure transactions. And the VA is doing that through multiple efforts that they're doing, which is the Blue Button, Vista, and their new case management system that will be rolled out in 2013. Our final recommendation was the use of technology and data analytics to further combat fraud, waste, and abuse. The numbers are pretty staggering when we look at that. And really, the IRS has done a great job with the modernization of legacy systems, but most importantly, moving from a pay and chase model to a verify and pay model, which not only decreases improper payments, but it also saves time and energy that's used to try and collect those. When we look at the overall savings that can be done from that, there's $100 billion that can be saved from improper payments. When we look at the healthcare fraud, there's $70 billion that can be taken out of the system. And with the IRS on uncollected taxes, the ability of applying those three solutions and bringing tax dollars in the door that today aren't coming in the door is $50 billion. That's a total savings of $220 billion if you just look at the simple application of what these agencies are currently doing. What's most important here is this is not unique to these three agencies, not the problems they're facing, nor the savings they're achieving. And those things can be applied across all agencies in the federal government to achieve yet additional cost savings, increased efficiencies, and better overall customer service.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. I think one of the things that should be noted here is we looked at these papers, do identify some really good best practices in government that can be elevated and put forward to the larger landscape here, because there's a lot of really good things happening. How do you expose them to take advantage of them? So next we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about, and here's another example. There's been a lot done around citizen engagement and in terms of interacting with citizens, but we think there's more. And so Steve, why don't you walk us through the smaller title Citizen Engagement paper?
Sure, thank you. Good morning. This is Steve Lynott. I was very excited to be with this group and on this paper for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of which is that over my professional career, I've just always been very intrigued by how technology can enable connections, personally, professionally, and of course as a citizen in government. I actually remember the first email I've ever sent in my life. I remember watching my children as they engaged with friends using instant messenger, 8, 9, 10 at a time, which I never understood how they could do that. I remember the first time that I engaged on a social media platform and how intriguing that was. And what's so incredible about this technology and the opportunity it affords us is that it really enables us to match the energy of the citizen with the breadth and reach of government agencies. So given the proliferation of the terms social media and crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, we thought it would be very helpful and very important to try to begin to give agencies a way to think about this domain. It's been around for quite a while, but in some senses, it's still just emerging. It's still relatively immature in how organizations, individuals, citizens, and agencies are employing this technology to have a voice and have an impact in their community, in their state, and in the government at large. So we thought it would be helpful to look at this and give the agencies and the administration sort of a framework, if you will. So the place that we started was we looked at we tried to do an inventory as much as we could of the various programs that were in place today and start to look at sort of patterns, if you will. And what we found was kind of an emergence of different themes, I guess, if you will, and they're outlined in the paper. We have 3 different cohorts that I'll talk about in a minute. So we wanted to try to put together what these sort of cohorts looked like, and then provide examples in each of those cohorts of how they were using social media to engage with the citizen community, and also to provide a useful mean for citizens and businesses to get access to the information available from government. Then we put together a framework, I guess a maturity model, if you will, for how the agencies could look at where they were today and how they were developing their social media or their citizen engagement model and how they could develop that over time. So those were kind of the 3 areas that we looked at. And what we found in looking at the different programs, models, communities that were evolving, we came up with 3 categories: partners, advocates, and consumers. So partners, we think about social media and or citizen-driven communities that have the ability and wherewithal to engage and help various ways in government activities. One of the simple ones that is out there today that I really like the model of is See, Click, Fix, where with your you can become a member of See, Click, Fix, and you can take a photo of some problem, a manhole cover that's off, a fire hydrant that's down, and send that into the local community so that they can see quickly where there are problems in the various locales. There are other examples in the first responder community as well. In advocates, of course, the simple example of that is in We the People, engaging citizens in conversations with the White House. And also, what's interesting about this particular topic is that we see this kind of connection points between citizen engagement and things like big data, which you're going to hear about in a minute. So We the People gets an enormous amount of commentary on that site. And potentially there's opportunities for big data to sift through all of that information to give the administration more insights and information about how citizens are thinking and what the patterns are, and where the intensity is. So we think there's some interesting connection points there. And then, of course, from a consumer standpoint, we have long had the access to census information through the eGov initiative 10 years ago, the Business Gateway that SBA did a number of years ago is another great example of where the agency collected a number of different disparate forms, a number of different pieces of information, and developed both information sharing and community for small business organizations. So again, a very impactful opportunity for using social media in government. In terms of recommendations, I would say that it really kind of boils down to 2. There's a number of different recommendations throughout the paper that we've talked about, but because of the early stage of citizen engagement, we think there's really 2 important components. For the agencies to really look at this way that we've bifurcated the cohorts, and not every agency is going to look at it the same way, but we suspect that each agency could look at the citizens and how they're engaging with either citizens or business or academia and come up with their own set of cohorts and develop profiles about each of those cohorts and how they want to develop systems, platforms, standards, and metrics for engaging with those various communities. And then secondly, to look at the plans that they put in place in terms of doing an assessment today of where they are, and where they want to get to. And we've provided a framework, I guess, if you will, a maturity model for how they can think about that. So in summary, we think that this is an enormous opportunity for government to leverage the energy of citizens, for the administration and agencies to look at this as really an opportunity to tap into another asset, if you will, in this source of energy and engagement from the citizen community. And we think that there's all sorts of opportunities, as I said earlier, for connections between citizen engagement and some of the other papers that you'll hear about and read about in big data. Also in education. Great opportunities and potential for matching students with those who are in retirement who may want to be mentors. So the potential for this arena to have an effect on government and its impact is just incredible, and I was very excited to be a part of this paper, so thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. And so you'll see there's a theme here. So we've got reducing some costs and tackling some of the deficit issues, the budget issues. Steve talked about sort of starting to talk about social media and some of the technologies to engage people a little bit. Now we're going to kind of go back and talk about another big challenge that Wendy already brought up, is the healthcare. So healthcare is what we already found out earlier was a huge cost, right, and spend. So Ramon, why don't you walk us through healthcare and how the team focused and some of the recommendations?
Well, to a large degree, we sort of found the coincidence of Sandy and the perfect storm theme that we faced a couple of weeks ago, because the parallels with the healthcare situation are just astounding. We already heard from Wendy about national debts being at a historic high. We also know that healthcare costs are totally out of control, extremely high. They're projected to be at about 40% of GDP by 2030. Now, when you actually intersect that with the fact that, as we all know, the aging of America, the population is getting older. Baby boomers are retiring at increasingly fast clips, but it also means that we're going to get the most significant hit to our tax base with the retirement of the baby boomers that we've ever had as a country. Now, when you link that to the fact that we have a healthcare system that has not been changed since World War II. It's focused on treatment of acute situations, acute diseases, and yet we know the Milken Institute has done some very, very interesting work that shows us that about 80% of healthcare costs are due to 7 diseases, of which 5 are preventable. So what we have is a healthcare system that, to a large degree, is focused on the wrong thing. It's focused on treating, to a large degree, preventable diseases. So we need very, very much to change the approach to dealing with this healthcare challenge. And this is to a large degree where we are suggesting that IT can play a very, very significant role. Now, IT has been already touted primarily around the bringing together at a national level this big push for electronic health records. And we think that clearly, the so-called big data is a very, very important part of this. But in particular, so far as it can help, not just in terms of preventing fraud and abuse and maybe achieving that 70 billion or so that Wendy mentioned of savings, but also in the development of policy to try to move the system precisely from an acute treatment-based system to one that is based on prevention and prevention of these chronic diseases. Now, prevention of chronic diseases to a large degree means a focus on wellness. And I know that to a certain degree this is not new. We've talked about wellness before. The importance here is that these diseases, these chronic diseases that we are really being hit by the most significant cost of the healthcare system, are diseases that are caused or influenced very significantly by lifestyle, by behavior. The proof points of this are some that we all know. We know, for example, the fact that a 5% decrease in the incidence of diabetes, and we know that diabetes is tied to obesity, how much we eat, what we eat. 5% decrease will actually give us $25 billion of savings over 5 years. We know that the prevention of HIV, one HIV prevention will save us about over $350,000 in a lifetime of treatment. We also know that a 1% reduction in hypertension, lowering blood pressures, that will result in something in the order of about $90 per person per year. All of this adds up, including, by the way, the productivity gains. Someone with diabetes, we know that will have at least 2 days less of work every year. They will be absent from work every year. We know similar numbers exist with the situation with smokers versus non-smokers. So what are we suggesting? What are we recommending specifically in terms of the federal government and of the use of health IT? As I said, the focus here is wellness, and wellness being substantially brought to a higher level by the federal government. First, because the federal government is the nation's largest employer. It has a very, very significant influence in terms of being able to provide leadership to the rest of the country as an employer. While there has been a certain amount of focus on wellness in the government over the last, I'd say, decade or so, half a decade or so, there really has not been any focused programs. There have been no metrics. The government needs to take wellness to a very, very significant new level, accept responsibility for the health of its employees, and provide leadership to the rest of the country. Now, here is where the move from big data to little data becomes important, and health IT, because a lot of what can really be accomplished vis-a-vis wellness, going back to citizen engagement and going back to what we call little data, is through the use of personal health devices. It is through the use of social media. We know, for example, that today, there is a number of different apps, that a lot of folks will carry on their cell phones or on their handhelds that are calorie counters that tell you exactly what you're going to be eating, when you get to that McDonald's, or they time, the time it took from your last cigarette and try to help you manage that. It's very interesting to see, for example, the numbers that already today 51% of all of us go to the internet looking for medical information, 49% for specific medical information. So we're already very, very directly involved. And the focus on little data, on personal health devices, on social media to try to help us as individuals to really manage our health, focus on wellness, that is something that the federal government, with its power of providing leadership as the nation's largest employer, can really make a significant contribution, I believe, towards this very, very scary perfect storm that we think is going to hit us.
Great, thanks, Ramon. So you've heard about three of the, what I'll say, challenge areas. We do have a fourth challenge area, which is about national security. That paper is not being released today. It's a couple weeks behind because we had a change in topic leads, but it will be coming out in the next couple weeks. But again, the thing I want to note is that it's not going to be cybersecurity. It's on national security because that's the government challenge, right? We'll figure out how to apply technology to that challenge. But I want to switch gears a little bit now. And we talk about these challenges. We've got healthcare. We've got, the role citizens want to become more involved in government, right? Citizen engagement. We've talked about the fiscal challenges. And we talked about the fact that technology can help with these challenges, right? And then we had another area that we looked at as a steering committee, which was jobs, right? And a lot of the jobs, quite frankly, are out there and around technology. And we know that technology can have a role in tackling some of these things. So how do we look at filling jobs in the technology area? So we tried to take the jobs focus and flip it into something that this community has a lot of passion around. And I will say, as we approach the topic of education around science, technology, and math education, this community had a lot of passion about it. So we decided to focus one of the papers on actually education, STEM education. So Wendy, why don't you give us a little bit of background and some of the recommendations on that paper?
Okay. As Molly said, we looked at a lot of the challenges, and if you just listen, science and technology are at the forefront of solving many of the challenges. And I think if you polled the United States public, you would find that most of them understand that we're living in a complex global economy, and everybody would agree with that. It's knowledge-based, it's complex, it's global. I think what other people might also say they know is that over 50% of economic growth is attributable to science and technology innovation over the past 50 years. And so you start to place emphasis on the fact that science and technology is at the forefront. And yet, where we've often been a leader in providing personnel in those fields in the past, we are no longer. It's amazing that STEM jobs are growing 3 times faster than other jobs in our economy, but yet it's estimated that by 2018 there'll be 230,000 jobs that we can't fill with appropriate STEM-based educated personnel. The statistics leading up to that, so how do those personnel get there? Well, they get trained and they get put into a pipeline. And the statistics are kind of sobering when you start to look at what is starting to fill that pipeline. So in an assessment of 15-year-olds, the United States ranked 14th in reading, 17th in science, and 25th in mathematics on an international assessment. If you look at 8th graders, less than 33% of 8th graders on NAEP testing demonstrated proficiency, not high levels, just proficiency in math and science. When we start to look across an international spectrum of 8th graders taught in Japan and Korea, 90% are taught STEM subjects by STEM-educated teachers. When we look at the United States, that number is only 66% of our students are being educated in STEM subjects by STEM-educated teachers. Now, we need to look at that from the perspective of how does that play out? And once again, on an international playing field, if you look at the number of bachelor degrees earned in STEM-related fields, 53% of total degrees, bachelor degrees in China, are STEM-related. 63% in Japan are STEM-related. And when we look at the United States, that number is 33%. So you can see that not only are we no longer a leader, but that gap is beginning to widen. Now, I don't want to say that nothing's being done because there's a lot of stuff going on. And education is further complicated by the fact that the federal government it plays a role, but a lot of the nuts and bolts of what happens in the day-to-day education of our students is determined at the state and local levels. There are many state and local municipalities and governments that are doing a lot to try and shore up education. There are certainly both for-profit and nonprofit organizations that are also actively engaged. And many are starting to look at STEM, but it might not be the primary focus. On the federal front, we do have the National Science and Technology Council, which does sponsor CoSTEM, which is the Committee for STEM Education. And that does coordinate programs. They are looking to produce a strategic plan, and they do look across the different agencies. There's also several agencies that are very, very actively involved in trying to advocate for STEM education. But it's just not enough. And so when we looked across the spectrum, we said, how at a federal level can we get involved to really further the emphasis on this growing deficit? The first was to increase visibility and leadership just to drive a focus on STEM education. A lot of people don't understand the fact that this deficit exists. And so we thought also it should be made fun. A lot of people want to engage in this kind of thing. So where we had the physical fitness challenge when we were growing up and we all took part and we got a little badge, we thought, why not have a national challenge on STEM education? And to do that, we also believed that it was essential for CoSTEM to become not only a permanent organization, because it's not necessary that thing will extend beyond next year, but also to elevate its leadership position in government. And they could begin to drive the national challenge. The second was, as a leader, and having all these disparate agencies and organizations trying to further the betterment of education, a lot of the metrics and the frameworks that are in place today measure how many students are engaged or how much money is spent. They're not outcome-based. We believed that there needs to be the establishment of a framework and a methodology that focuses on establishing metrics that are focused on outcome-based. Which programs are producing results and which programs are not, and then funneling resources into the programs that are producing those results. And finally, I think what's obvious to everybody as we look at education and IT is the availability of a digital technology set to educators and students to do better education. And that is making sure broadband is accessible to everybody in the United States. And although there's broadband in a lot of places, it's also too expensive for people to engage with in some households. So making it accessible. And finally, making sure that those tools, on the broadband are available and have content that's moving along with where our economy is moving. So what I'd like to leave you with is I think we have a silent national crisis. I'm not sure people really understand the deficit and how it's growing with our position as worldwide leaders. But what I also want to tell you is that's important is we're not thinking that massive new funding is needing to be employed here. What we think is that the strategic planning that CoSTEM is looking at needs to get done and needs to be looked at. We think that the tactical implementation of specific programs needs to be furthered. And as that's done, I think what we're going to find is that there is a potential for reallocation of funding to the outcome-based, demonstrating positive outcome programs and away from others.
Great, thank you, Wendy. It's interesting. So a lot of passion around this subject because of the challenges that we were talking about and making sure that we had people who are skilled and able and educated to actually help in the challenges, right, on the government side, but also on the industry side, too. So all of us on the panel here from industry, and we're trying to hire the best and the brightest as well to support our clients within the federal government. So I think there's a lot of mutual interest here to have an improvement in this, and as Wendy says, this growing silent national crisis. So with that, as we looked through the challenge areas, the last one we want to talk about is not anything new in some ways, but we also felt that it's really important that we highlight the fact that business and technology alignment are so important in order to bring technology to the table to solve the problem. So Ramon, why don't you bring us to the close here on this final topic that we have today with business and IT alignment.
Thank you, Molly. But it's absolutely right. There was that old saying about if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. By the same token, if you know you want to go to New York, you better not take the road to Atlanta. And this is what business IT alignment is about. We know that today everything that we touch to a large degree is very heavily influenced by technology. This year, over 1 trillion transactions are processed in IT, environments by Medicare and Medicaid. 110 million invoices are paid by the Department of Defense, paid by their computer systems. The 5 million veterans in this country receive close to $50 billion in benefits that are distributed by computers. We can't fly, we can't have troop deployments, we can't have our precision weapons hit their targets, we can't keep our food safe without computers. Well, these IT environments, these IT solutions had best be aligned to deliver business solutions, the business solutions that our agencies are putting in place in order to accomplish their missions. To a large degree, as Molly said, this isn't new. We've been talking about the need to have this alignment, and yet we're very, very far from being able to accomplish it for a number of reasons. But it is time. It is opportune with the advent of a new administration this coming year to take a look at it again. And alignment really has to be looked at in a number of different contexts. We want to align what the citizen requires with what the government provides in terms of services. We want to align strategy with operations. We need to align decisions with execution, people with processes and technology. The 3 most significant aspects of alignment that we decided we needed to talk to were around effectiveness, efficiency, and security. We need to align IT and business in an effective manner. And what that means is making sure that we are doing the right things. Doing the right things, what exactly does that mean, and who can determine, whether we are doing the right things? Well, to a large degree, the arbiters of whether we're doing the right things, whether we're working effectively, whether there is true alignment between IT and business are the citizens. They're the users. They're the stakeholders of our government, agency by agency. And we know what the metrics should be. We shouldn't be aligning IT to IT metrics to see whether we are doing the right things. We should be aligning IT to the strategic objectives, to those mission critical objectives that each agency has. We should be aligning it also to service level agreements that IT, the CIO shop, establishes with the different program offices. So the alignment of IT in the context of effectiveness, are we doing the right things? We know who should be the judges of that and what kind of alignment we should have and the metrics. The second area is around efficiency. This is making sure, not that we're doing the right things, that's effective, but that we're doing things right. This is now about operations to a large degree, and this is where it is also important to remember that efficiency is not just about cost savings. It can also be about time saving as a very, very important resource. So it is, are we doing things right? And who should be the judge of where we're doing things right? Well, if we are the IT shop to a large degree in an organization, it should be the leadership, because there should clearly be a plan that focuses on the outcomes and the costs. In most private sector organizations, there is always a very, very significant tracking of costs that sometimes in government does not have the same parallel. And as a result, we lose out on a lot of that hard-nosed set of business decisions that we have in the private sector. So tracking of costs against a plan is also a very, very important part of what we need to do in the context of alignment. The third thing we said, effectiveness, efficiency. The third is security. Security has become such an absolutely essential component of our IT environment. The threats are so significant that we need to make sure that we have IT and business aligned in a secure manner that does also provide continuity. Now, security does not mean shutting everything down. Our skies were most secure after 9/11 when we grounded all of our airplanes. No, security means that we must have better ways of providing access to the data that they need whenever they need it to the users and to the citizens. But we need to make sure that that happens in a secure manner. It's not just about technology, it's about mindset. It's about people recognizing the importance of having the right passwords that are not 1, 2, 3, that are not your birthday. It is very, very much about mindset. And that also then is a requirement that I think comes together with some of the recommendations that we are suggesting are going to hopefully move alignment to the next level. And those recommendations are, first, making sure that the CIO is not just the steward of an organization's data or an organization's hardware and complies with software license and things like that. The CIO has to be a change agent, an innovator, and an operations leader. So CIO for Chief Information Officer, but also for change agent, innovator, and operations leader. It starts with making sure that you hire the right person for the right job. It can't be someone that does not enjoy and have the respect of the other members of the leadership team. It has to be someone that has not just the technical skills, but also the management and the people skills. Very, very important. I think it's also extremely important that in that alignment, that the top of the agency, at the secretary level, foster an environment and a series of relationships of confidence and trust between the CIO and other members of that leadership team. That an IT governance board be put in place. In many cases, it exists, but that it be put in place with the participation of the top leadership of the agency, and that the CIO really be given and empowered to take the leadership in that IT governance board, and that in many occasions the CIO also be allowed to take responsibility for enterprise-wide, agency-wide initiatives that in some way are related to IT, but that affect programs across the whole agency, and in some cases also government-wide initiatives that are relevant, specific to that can be led by that agency. Lastly, we're also recommending, because it is extremely important, that alignment happen at the government-wide level. In other words, by looking out, by looking beyond, the agency and finding, innovation and better ways of doing things in other agencies and bringing that in and then providing that alignment. Let me just leave you the reminding that all things cyber, which tend to be a synonym these days for IT, but all things cyber stem from the Greek root for Kiber, which was the steersman, And the job was to keep, that specific boat in the right direction. Alignment is about having that keeper, that IT, focused on the right programs, on delivering the right business solutions.
Great. Thank you, Ramon. And I think that's a great way to summarize things throughout the papers, which says really, as we look at these challenges, right, these biggest challenges that the nation's facing right now, we've tried to address some of them. We believe that we'll fall short or we'll miss opportunities if we don't really align the business and the mission with technology, because we believe that the technology is really part of a lot of it, can play a big role in providing solutions to some of these challenges and making headway. So if we don't align them, we're going to miss opportunities, or we're going to fall short, or it's going to take us a little bit longer. So huge opportunities. And if we look at the landscape and the history of the U.S., we'll see that innovation and technology over the past decade, no matter where you are in the technology curve, have really played a huge role. So I think that's one thing that we can leave you with today as we open it up for questions.
Absolutely, and at this time, if you would like to ask a question via the phone, you may do so by pressing the star and 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you have heard that your question has been answered, you may remove yourself by pressing the pound key. Once again, if you would like to ask a question via the phone lines, you can do so by pressing star and 1, and we'll pause a moment to allow questions to queue. And we will take our first question from the side of Nicole Johnson from the Federal Times. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I just want to make sure I'm clear on how you all arrived at the savings number. I've kind of been browsing through and looking for explanations, but kind of in a clear, concise way, how you all arrived at this number.
So I believe you're talking about the one around fiscal stewardship?
Yes, please, the 220.
Oh, the 200.
And I know the breakdown, but I mean, so how did you arrive at that number exactly?
So when you want to take this, and we also have someone else in the room who might
Yeah, I was going to say Lee Holcomb is here, and he was the tech lead on the paper. Lee, do you want to go ahead and do the breakdown beyond the high-level numbers?
Okay, Lee is coming up to the microphone, so just give him a second.
Sure, I'd be glad to. We broke it down into 3 general areas. The first one had to do with the use of big data, data analytics to improve the cost of healthcare. And we took an estimate from McKinsey and Company for the overall healthcare system and how big data could improve that. And out of that, we've derived approximately $70 billion per year of savings that could be achieved by applying big data and analytics to improved healthcare delivery in the federal sector. That would certainly hit Medicare and Medicaid payments in particular. The second area that we looked at was taking best practices from the private sector and applying that more broadly across the federal government. And a lot of this came from recommendations actually that were provided earlier from the CEOs of a number of private sector corporations. And they believe that there's an overall savings of about $100 billion a year by taking best practices from the commercial sector and applying those IT best practices to the federal government. That would include the supply chain in particular, monetizing assets in the federal government, looking for infrastructure consolidation, and looking for shared services. So that's approximately $100 billion a year. And then finally, looking at the general area of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government, we looked at, again, applying techniques to go after that. And specifically here, we looked at the collection of revenue by the federal government. The IRS has estimated approximately $385 billion a year in what they call the tax gap, uncollected, if you will, taxes. Approximately $100 billion a year in improper payments And if we're able to apply our technologies in this area, and quite frankly, the IRS is beginning to deploy some of these concepts, they believe about 10% of that total expenditure could be recovered each year, which would amount to about $50 billion a year. So all taken, that adds up to about $220 billion a year in savings.
Okay. Next question.
And once again, if you would like to ask a question, you may do so by pressing the star and 1 on your touch-tone phone. And again, we'll pause to allow any further questions to queue over the phone. And it appears we have no questions at this time.
Okay, well, I would like to thank everyone for coming. The reports will be posted on the ACT-IAG website. They're now available, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you.